안녕하세요. 인간적인 여자입니다. 1989년 한국은 단 한 번도 자국 기술로 자주포를 설계해본 적이 없었는데요. 남의 설계도를 빌려 조립하던 나라가 불과 40년 만에 전 세계 궤도형 자주포 시장의 절반 이상을 장악한 무기를 만들어냈습니다. 바로 K9 자주포의 이야기입니다.
Nearly 40 years later, the K9 Thunder owns more than half of the global tracked artillery market, and it's been sold to 10 separate nations, battle-tested across multiple conflicts, and is now even being evaluated by the US Army themselves. What started as a desperate answer to North Korean guns pointed directly at Seoul ended up just about conquering the global market along the way. Welcome to the best artillery underdog story of modern defense.
당시 한국이 가진 자주포는 미국제 M109를 라이선스로 복제한 K55가 전부였는데요. 문제는 휴전선 너머에 훨씬 더 위협적인 존재가 버티고 있었다는 것입니다.
Across the DMZ, North Korea had the M1978 Coxswain, a 170mm beast on a tank chassis with a barrel so long it looked like an oil rig's pipe had been welded to the front of it. The Coxswain could reach 40 kilometers with conventional shells alone and up to 60 with rocket-assisted shells. This is particularly important for this geography, given that Seoul sits at just roughly 50 kilometers from the DMZ, and there were a lot of these things sitting in hardened positions that could rain shell after shell down on the capital city, with a population of some 10 million people at the time. And if that wasn't bad enough, they also badly outnumbered the South Korean artillery in terms of quantity near the border by a figure of 2 to 1.
손쉬운 길은 기존 장비를 개량하는 것이었지만 한국은 훨씬 더 어려운 길을 택했는데요. 1988년 처음부터 완전히 새로운 자주포를 직접 설계하기로 결정한 것입니다.
In 1988, they rejected the incremental upgrade path entirely, demanding something completely new. The following year, the Agency for Defense Development and Samsung Aerospace Industries were tasked with building it. That was still a little fuzzy just what that it would look like. Samsung had built over 1,000 K-55s, but only under American license, essentially assembling someone else's blueprint. So trying to create one of the most advanced artillery systems on Earth from scratch was, to put it mildly, uncharted territory. What they settled on was something that was either going to come out as an incredible feat of Korean engineering prowess or be looked back on as a wildly overly optimistic project. A 155mm gun on a 52 caliber barrel, significantly longer than the K-55's 39 caliber tube, that could match the Coxswain's 40-kilometer reach. The idea was fire multiple rounds in seconds and then move away fast enough to get the hell out of Dodge before the enemy can return fire.
하지만 개발 과정은 결코 순탄하지 않았는데요. 뇌관 문제 하나를 해결하는 데만 한국 최고의 두뇌들이 무려 5년을 매달려야 했습니다.
The hard one was an issue with the primer that caused differential pressures inside the barrel to push in the opposite direction of the shell, which snapped detonators during firing. While that may sound like a relatively small issue, it took some of the country's best and brightest minds about 5 years to finally reach a reliable workaround. For a while, the project's future was genuinely in doubt. If they couldn't solve this, they couldn't ship this as a battle-ready piece of hardware. Just when things were looking up, one of the prototypes caught fire during a test. While firing 18 rounds through the barrel in 3 minutes, a lightning pace far exceeding that of the K-55, unburned propellant built up inside the turret until, after enough firing, it ignited. The damaged vehicle's internal systems survived and were eventually repaired and sent back for testing. We don't envy the poor guy who was the first to take that unit out for another test. I mean, sure, it's all patched up, nothing to worry about. It's definitely not going to blow up in your face again. Mishaps aside, though, the development project was finally declared complete in October 1998, by which point the prototypes had fired more than 12,000 rounds and driven 18,000 kilometers across nearly a decade of trial.
그렇게 완성된 K9의 진가는 바로 속도에 있었는데요. 진지에 도착해 60초 안에 첫 포탄을 쏘고 적의 위치를 파악하기도 전에 이미 사라져 있는 것이죠.
This new model could pull up to the scene, stabilize itself, and have a round in the air in 60 seconds or less. Less than a minute after it was finished, the crew could already be trekking off at full speed. That meant that by the time the enemy was able to track down where the incoming fire was coming from, target their own units and open fire, the K9s were already gone, something the K-55 just could not do. Against an enemy with a 2-to-1 artillery advantage, staying put was simply a death sentence. But the beauty of this thing wasn't just speed in terms of setting up and getting away. It also came down to how fast it could sustain fire. In burst mode, the K9 could put 3 rounds downrange in just 15 seconds, each one being fired on a different trajectory by the fire control computer so that they all arrived at precisely the same time. For the first time, South Korea had artillery that could match the coxswains pointed at Seoul tit for tat. They knew it.
그리고 2010년 11월, K9은 최악의 상황에서 첫 실전을 맞이했는데요. 그날의 연평도는 준비가 전혀 되어 있지 않았습니다.
That morning, the 6 K9s of the 7th Artillery Battery were on Yongpyong in the worst possible state of readiness. 4 had been running a routine live-fire exercise, which meant that hatches were open, crews were out of their vehicles, and each K9's onboard ammunition had already been depleted on training, leaving them well below the full 48-round combat capacity. One gun somehow got a live round jammed in its barrel from a misfire and was completely out of action. To make matters worse, there were no K-10 resupply vehicles anywhere on the island at all, and the counter-battery radar, an aging system that had gone down 3 separate times already that year, had what you might charitably describe as a documented reliability problem. At 14:34, North Korean batteries on Mudo Island and a recently repositioned rocket launcher at K9으로 on the mainland opened fire. Roughly 170 shells and rockets were fired at the islands in the opening round, and while some overshot their targets, plenty made contact with both the military camp and the K9's positions. Shrapnel tore through the open hatches of 2 K9s, wrecking their communication systems and killing one gun's autoloader entirely.
포탄이 쏟아지는 와중에도 승무원들은 차량으로 달려가 방역을 준비했는데요. 결정적인 것은 직격을 당하고도 K9의 장갑이 끝까지 버텨주었다는 사실입니다.
At 14:47, 3 guns finally returned fire. They aimed at pre-planned targets on Mudo Island because they knew North Korean guns were stationed there. The problem was that the shells actually hitting Yongpyong or coming primarily from K9으로 on the mainland, and nobody was any the wiser because the radar couldn't tell them that. It took another 13 minutes, likely through the decidedly low-tech method of watching for muzzle flashes, before the Marines corrected their fire onto the real threat. Now at long last, they were in business. North Korean fire paused around 14:55, but a second wave opened up at 15:10 and continued until about 15:41. By then, a 4th K9 had been brought back online. Its crew had run field wire to replace destroyed comms and switched the dead autoloader to manual, and all 4 guns pounded K9으로 through the second barrage. Reports citing sources close to North Korean officials later estimated that more than 40 North Korean casualties resulted from this, though the exact breakdown between killed in action and wounded remains disputed. 2 Marines were killed in the bombardments, along with 2 civilian construction workers, but both Marine deaths occurred outside the K9s themselves, in or near the camp area. Crucially, the K9's armor held up under direct exposure to shell fire, though, and the only damage to them was a direct result of the open hatches. The guns themselves had performed quite well, in spite of the failure of the base's radar detection system.
이 전투는 예상치 못한 또 하나의 결과를 가져왔는데요. 과거 화력에서 밀리던 한국이 이렇게 압도적인 성과를 거두자 K9은 순식간에 세계적인 명성을 얻게 된 것입니다.
Yongpyong did something else that hadn't exactly been planned for too. It helped make the K9 famous. The shelling was international news for weeks, and the focus on the South's ability to have such lopsided success against the North after having previously been outgunned was a huge PR boost for the country's domestic defense industry. The K9 had already received interest from several governments around the world, but after this, it was sure to be world famous.
하지만 자랑스러운 성공 뒤에는 감추고 싶은 약점도 있었는데요. 핵심 부품의 절반가량을 해외에 의존하고 있었고, 특히 독일제 엔진이 발목을 잡곤 했습니다.
The K9's engine was a compact German 8-cylinder diesel engine, the MTU MT881, putting out 1,000 horsepower with a cold start rating down to -42 Celsius. It was genuinely excellent, one of the best in its class. By this point, interest from foreign governments was already picking up. The K9's combination of range, rate of fire, and price had been turning heads across NATO, but Germany liked to have opinions about where its engines ended up, and on May the 4th, 2000, the exact same day that South Korea signed a memorandum of understanding with Turkey to build Ankara their own K9 variants, Berlin informed Seoul that it would not approve such exports to Turkey. The message was clear. South Korea might have the best design on Earth, but Germany held a veto over who got to buy it. Korea scrambled, searching for foreign engine alternatives with one hand while reportedly leveraging its agreement to purchase Germany's Type 214 submarines with the other. Berlin ultimately backed down a few months later, approving exports of up to 400 engines, and the Turkish deal went ahead. But the lesson landed hard. The entire export program, which was supposed to be the payoff for a decade of development, could be held hostage by a single foreign component.
이 뼈아픈 교훈 앞에서 한국은 포기하지 않았는데요. 결국 독일제보다 더 뛰어난 국산 엔진을 스스로 개발해내며 그 상징적인 무대를 사우디의 방산 전시회로 삼았습니다.
Seoul had seen and launched a 75 billion won domestic engine program, partnered with Britain's Ricardo plc for the initial development work, and wound up with their own domestically produced SMV 1000. It came in 76 kilos lighter than the German equivalent, 5% more fuel efficient, with better cold weather starting performance, and most important of all, contained zero German-made parts. Mass production began in September 2024, and the first K9 fitted with the new engine was unveiled, with what you might call pointed symbolism, at the World Defence Show in none other than Saudi Arabia. Negotiations with Riyadh started shortly thereafter. But the engine, for all the headaches it caused, was only the most visible piece.
이렇게 국산화를 이뤄낸 한국의 방위산업은 대학과 중소기업까지 함께 성장시켰는데요. 여기에 K10 탄야군 반차까지 더해지며 K9은 완전한 무기체계로 거듭났습니다.
A partial fix to this arrived in 2006 with the K10 ammunition resupply vehicle, built on the same chassis as the K9 so that it could match the howitzer across any terrain. The K10 carries 104 rounds and over 500 propellant charges, enough to fully reload 2 K9s, and the transfer is entirely automated, which we can assure you came as a great relief to the crews responsible for the operation. The vehicle pulls up behind a K9, extends a conveyor arm that locks into a hatch on the back of the vehicle and feeds shells through at 12 rounds per minute. Critically, no hatches are open for the process, avoiding putting the crew at risk. By the mid-2000s, the K9 had evolved from a prototype that caught fire during testing into a complete weapon system, complete with a domestic supply chain that was increasingly free of foreign string.
그러자 세계가 K9을 주목하기 시작했는데요. 첫 고객이었던 터키는 실전에서 이 플랫폼이 얼마나 강한지를 직접 증명해냈습니다.
In 2008, after the launch of Operation Sun, when batteries along the Turkish-Iraqi border took full advantage of the gun's 40-plus kilometer range to strike PKK positions. Thousands of shells were shot over a week of sustained bombardment without any equipment failures, as support to Ankara's ground component crossing into northern Iraq by both ground and air. That alone validated the platform, but the real transformation started as Ankara really began to ramp up its campaigns in Syria. Through successive campaigns, the Turks progressively integrated their TB2 Bayraktar drones into their Fatina batteries as makeshift forward eyes. By the time Operation Spring Shield kicked off in Idlib in early 2020, the combination had matured into something entirely new. A drone artillery kill chain where the TB2s found Syrian armored columns, relayed coordinates to the guns, who then proceeded to wipe the targets out. The drones would then circle back around to confirm the kills. Turkey claimed that 23 tanks, 10 armored vehicles, 23 artillery pieces, 5 helicopters and multiple air defense systems were destroyed in the first 24 hours alone.
그리고 2022년 러시아의 우크라이나 침공은 K9의 수출을 폭발적으로 끌어올렸는데요. 폴란드는 수십억 달러 규모의 계약을 맺으며 한국 방위산업의 든든한 파트너가 되었습니다.
But when Russia crossed the border and Poland started hemorrhaging equipment for donations to Ukraine, it was clear that more was going to be needed, and fast. Warsaw signed up for 212 K9s, and the first 24 were in-country roughly 4 months later. Given how much business had been booming in Seoul, they were actually sitting on a domestic surplus of the K9, which would quickly be put to good use. They started to ship the extra units owned by the South Korean forces as gap fillers, while new production ramped up to meet the new demand. All 212 units from the first contract were delivered by the end of 2025, and a second contract for 152 more followed shortly thereafter. To date, Warsaw's total K9 commitment has surged past $5 billion. By 2024, the K9 had been delivered to 10 nations, with hundreds more on order. And then the United States themselves came calling, and that, ladies and gentlemen, should show you just how world famous this really became.
우크라이나 전장은 K9 플랫폼에게 가장 혹독한 시험장이 되었는데요. 폴란드의 크라브를 통해 K9의 기본기가 서방의 다른 시스템들이 무너지는 조건 속에서도 버텨냈습니다.
Crews received target coordinates through a digital fire control system, drove into concealed firing positions in under a minute, put bursts of 6 to 8 rounds down range, and then got the hell out of Dodge before the Russian counter-battery radar could fix their location. It was the shoot-and-scoot cycle that Samsung had designed the entire project around back in 1989, this time playing out in real life. Since then, the crab's hull has proved itself across every phase of the war. Defensive withdrawals, counter-offensives, you name it. The chassis, suspension, and engine held up under conditions that managed to break other Western systems.
물론 드론의 시대는 모든 자주포에 새로운 과제를 던졌는데요. 이 교훈을 바탕으로 한화는 이미 다음 세대의 해답을 준비하고 있었습니다.
The lessons were clear, though. The K9's fundamentals held up where other Western systems didn't. But the threat it was never designed for, the ones that came from above, had exposed gaps that no amount of field-improvised K-drama was going to permanently fix. Hanwha was already working on the answer. "27 years after the first production K9 rolled out of the factory, the gun is still being worked and redesigned. Hanwha has two successor variants in development, the K9A2 and K9A3, each one pushing the platform further along in technological sophistication and advanced weaponry, from the 5-person crewed howitzer that entered service in 1999 and closer to something that might not need a crew at all."
이 진화의 배경에는 한국이 마주한 인구 절벽이라는 현실이 있는데요. 사람이 부족해지는 만큼 K9은 더 적은 인원으로 더 강한 화력을 내는 방향으로 발전하고 있습니다.
And completion around 2027 is the near-term response. The design replaces the manual charge-loading bottleneck with a fully automated system that feeds both shells and propellant charges to the gun. That's somewhere around a 50% improvement in rate of fire, while dropping the crew from 5 to 3. But the autoloader isn't just about firing faster. Moving all 48 rounds into the turret where the system can access them means that the K10 can now restock the gun completely in just 15 minutes. Composite rubber tracks bring the weight under 47 tons despite all the new hardware, deliberately freeing up about 2 tons of margin for bolt-on protection kits. K-jammer, anti-drone jammers, electronic countermeasures, the kind of stuff Ukraine has shown clearly that you just can't go to war without anymore.
더 놀라운 미래는 K9 스림에 담겨 있는데요. 지구상 어떤 군대도 아직 갖지 못한 승무원이 아예 타지 않는 무인 자주포를 향하고 있습니다.
The barrel extends from 52 to 58 calibers, pushing range past 80 kilometers with precision ammunition. But the range is almost a footnote compared to the real point. Nobody would be in these vehicles at all. The whole concept revolved around a crew command vehicle designated the K11A1, built on the same K9 chassis, sitting behind the front line and remotely operating 3 unmanned K9A3s through LiDAR, driving cameras, and remote communication systems. The command crew handles everything from afar: navigation, positioning, targeting, firing. You get the idea. No army on Earth has something quite like this, though we highly suspect that Seoul isn't alone in racing towards it. But for all the benefits this new system would have, there is very much a sense that this setup risks putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will.
그리고 이 모든 여정의 정점에 가장 예상치 못한 나라가 K9을 찾아왔는데요. 자주포의 원조라 할 수 있는 미국이 처음으로 외국 설계를 문두드린 것입니다.
As we discussed, the US Army has tried multiple times since the 90s to replace the aging M109 Paladin, and every time they've come up short for one reason or another. 3 decades later, no fewer than 3 different projects scrapped and billions of dollars put into it, the Americans still don't have a replacement for the gun whose first generation hails from the 1960s. In April 2024, the Army issued a formal request for information that explicitly invited foreign designs, something it has essentially never done for a major ground combat system. Hanwha brought a K9 to Yuma Proving Grounds and fired Excalibur-guided rounds at 50 kilometers, proving full compatibility with American ammunition, and the military brass noticed. They were impressed. Then in December 2025, the Army signed a research agreement with Hanwha to take one piece that had worked from their previous projects, the long-range barrel, and mount it onto a K9 chassis. Hanwha has offered to build the guns in a new factory in Alabama, and the Army is expected to pick a winner later this year. If they take the deal, it would be the first foreign-designed artillery system adopted by the US Army, which in and of itself says more about how far the K9 has traveled than any specification or combat record ever could. From a country that couldn't design a howitzer to one that owns more than half the global market in 25 years and now potentially the American one too, well, it's not bad for a gun that started as a desperate answer to a North Korean cannon pointed at Seoul, is it? Thank you for watching.
단 한 번도 자주포를 설계해본 적 없던 나라가 서울을 겨눈 북한의 대포에 대한 절박한 해답 하나로 여기까지 왔습니다. 뇌관 하나를 붙들고 5년을 씨름하던 그 밤들, 시험장에서 불길에 휩싸진 시제품 앞에서 사업의 미래가 흔들리던 그 순간들이 없었다면 지금의 K량은 존재하지 않았을 것입니다. 남의 엔진에 발목을 잡히고도 결국 더 나은 엔진을 스스로 만들어낸 그 고집이 지금 세계 10개 나라의 포병 진지 위에 서 있는 것이죠. 그리고 이제는 자주포의 원조였던 미국조차 이 무기 앞에서 걸음을 멈추고 있습니다. 한 나라가 절박함을 기술로 다시 그 기술을 신뢰로 바꾸는데 걸린 시간은 겨우 한 세대였습니다. 우리가 걸어온 그 길이 이제 세계의 기준이 되어가고 있는 것입니다. 지금까지 인간적인 여자였습니다. 구독과 좋아요는 큰 힘이 됩니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다.
따사로운 인간적인 여자